So thank you for joining us for tonight's United Policyholders Roadmap to Recovery webinar. Our topic is mechanics of rebuilding your home. Want to appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us, and hope you find this information useful. A little bit about United Policyholders. We're a national nonprofit that serve as a voice and information resource for consumers in all 50 states. We've been doing disaster and insurance recovery for 32 years now, starting with the Oakland Hills wildfires. And we're funded exclusively by donations and grants. We do not take money from insurance companies. And one of the unique things about us is our volunteer team, our team up members, professional and community members who have personal experience in disaster recovery and the insurance claims process. So a little bit more about Team Up. We have a professional staff in our San Francisco-based office, about 15 people. We partner very heavily with government, with business, and our nonprofit partners. And we have those volunteers that I mentioned. So for Team Up, we have our previous catastrophic loss survivors who want to pay that information they gained forward. And then our consumer-focused professionals, such as Doug joining us today, and Lisa, who's coming from the government side. And that's how we bring these educational programs together, as we try to bring you all of the experts we can find to address these topics. We have 3 programs: the Roadmap to Recovery, which is tonight's event. We have our Roadmap to Preparedness, which is where we take those lessons learned that people wish they had known before a disaster and share that information to reduce risk and help people be more resilient to disaster. And then finally, our Advocacy and Action Program, which is where we work with to protect consumers' insurance rights with regulators, legislators, and other entities that are able to help in that space. This is our disaster help libraries. If you're new to United Policyholders and our Roadmap to Recovery program, please go here and then find your specific state's disaster. And this is where we have state-specific resources, information to pro-consumer professional help, samples and examples of letters, forms, our Survivors Speak series, and then more information about upcoming workshops. And if you want to follow along with today's slide deck, please go here to events. On the homepage, go to events, go to Mechanics of Rebuilding, and you'll be able to download it here and follow along. And the recording will be posted here afterwards. So you don't need to ask for it. It'll be posted as soon as it processes tonight. And just a reminder for everyone, we know you've got a lot going on, and so we always like to give you these aphorisms to help you moving through. And at this point in the road to recovery, just focusing on that this is a marathon, not a sprint. There are so many things that you're still juggling. Give yourself grace and space to take the time to go through this and pace yourself. Fine print. This workshop is intended to be general guidance only. We are not providing legal advice. And if you have a specific legal question, we recommend you consult an experienced policyholder attorney. Our speakers are volunteering their time as educators. And so, please honor that. They're sharing their knowledge they have. It doesn't mean they have the answer to everything that you want to know. We understand that, but they're giving us freely of their time, and we appreciate that so much. And then just to speak, joining me today, we have Annie Barber, our Roadmap to Recovery liaison for United Policyholders. Annie is the dark screen that you see. She is in Maui right now, so she's dialed in on her phone to join us tonight. Annie, thank you for making time for us tonight. We also have Doug Robinson, the Vice President of Operations with Christofferson Builders, based in California. Lisa Ritchie, who is the planning manager currently for the town of Erie in Colorado, and who had worked previously with the Marshall Fire. I want to thank all of you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you. And then for our topics tonight, we've broken this into very bite-sized pieces. We're going to go through vetting and hiring a contractor, contracts, permits, all of these things on this list. Just to set expectations. We'll be hitting the information on the slides, and then our panelists are also going to contribute to the conversation as we get to those slides. So it will be a little free flowing. Carolyn, we do have the Q&A open, correct?
Yeah, yes, we do.
Thank you. And so we do have the question and answer section of Zoom is open. So if you have a question on one of these topics, we will try to weave it into the presentation if we can. And if not, we'll ask our panelists to try to answer it on the back end if they have that answer. So, and let's get, without further ado, let me get our David Gurley piece here. So David is a contractor, but he's also a disaster survivor from California, and he had recorded a short message that we are going to share with you. It provided my technology works. And my technology is not going to work because I have to. It doesn't work. Never mind. We will share it with you. Carolyn, I'll put it in the chat that we can share it with you. My apologies. I just can't make it play in the PowerPoint presentation. So, but David's basic message is, as you're going through the slog, just understand it's going to be okay. There's a lot to do, but you can make it happen. And so following up on David's message that you will catch later, just reminding yourself to pace yourself and avoid those anxiety-driven decisions. And Annie, feel free to pop in here on any of these things. We understand that those queries from your insurance adjuster about when you're starting rebuilding, when your ALE is going to end, all of these things create anxiety. And the constant questions from people who are not in the rebuilding process. And then just the reality in your neighborhood of watching other people progress faster than you. And so, you know, you're moving forward at your own pace. You know, just you have to lean into that and stay focused on your piece, because those distractions will get you off track. And Annie, you are up here, and just tell me when to advance your slides.
Yeah, so I'm a 2017 Tubbs Fire survivor. I chose to build with a production builder, meaning a bigger builder who could give economy of scale master floor plans. This is when they were just starting to get ready to lay my foundation. So this is the beginning. Next. I came around the corner one day, my guy and I went for a bike ride, and lo and behold, they were pouring my foundation. And as Valerie was speaking about, this foundation just made my heart fly, and it gave my neighbors extreme anxiety because they did not have one. My production builder was able to do 20 homes a month, 20 foundations, move to 20, those 20 having their sticks in the ground, the framing done, and so on and so on. So he had a definite plan. So this is the framing. It's starting to look like something. And during this process, I'm sure I was there at least once a day. I could not, it was a pull. Next. The interior is starting to get done. I'm highly disturbed at this stage that they're not locking my house up every night. But somehow we made it through without anything being disturbed on the inside. Next. And here we are with the finished product. This was definitely one of the quicker builds that was happening in the neighborhood. And I got my keys a year and 2 weeks after the fire, which was a little unprecedented. And my son and his wife ended up moving into my house, which was the plan originally. I just didn't know it would be my new house. It was a little creepy, being the only house on the block that was complete and resided in.
And Annie, that's why you went with a production builder, right? To get you back faster.
Yeah, I went with a production builder because for me, myself, it made sense. I didn't have to go through architecture, um, all the stages before starting the rebuild process. I wanted to get it complete. I didn't feel like I was overreacting. One of the things that I did do was I was part of a group, and so I had gone out and interviewed the production builders as to what they offered. And so in my job of interviewing them for the neighborhood, it became clear to me who I wanted to use. So I kind of had a jump on it.
All right, well, thank you for that. Now we're just going to look at the same time, a fire that happened almost at the same time, but a very different timeline. So this is from the Thomas Fire in 2017. And as you notice, this is 9 months later and the lot is just cleared. So the issues impacting that in this community. A part of the 10 months into the rebuild, this is what they look like. And their rebuild was a little slower. They actually held until they knew how much money they had to rebuild. And that made a huge difference for them, their timeline, as you'll see here. And again, this is where focusing on what you can control and what you need to do makes such a difference. They had significant delays after debris removal because they ended up firing their contractor, hiring a new one. So they had to go through and do new plans, permits, and Doug, anything you want to share on how that can derail a timeline would be greatly appreciated here. Because you can see they're rebuilding. From the point of rebuilding, it took 18 months to rebuild. And that's almost 9 months after starting rebuilding, 9 months after.
Right. So yeah, the first thought as Annie was going through her slides as well, a lot of the efficiencies that Annie saw was the stock plans, quote unquote, and then the production builder. So that builder had very good control of his costs. And if he was doing 20 a month, which is a 1-a-day schedule, he also had very good control of costs going into the future, meaning he was able to lock down some of these costs and able to maintain his pricing. I'm not sure how it went for you, Annie, but I'm assuming he stayed within reason on some of those things. But an 18-month build, first of all, it's not a stock plan. I'm sure it's a custom plan. That's more difficult to price. It's also more difficult to get material there. As things start to slow down, it kind of starts to cascade. So somebody got in over their head, it looks like. And I personally took over as a contractor for somebody who was right at the finish line in one of those smaller rebuild areas in Coffey Park. And the contractor essentially backed out of it. And it was only literally 3 weeks of work to get it done, but it took me 4 weeks to get the permit changed into the name so I could start getting inspections. So there's a box for owner builder. I would recommend that in most cases. It leaves the owner in control of the permit rather than the contractor, as well as some of the architects get releases from them. The architect in this case for me was out of Oregon, difficult to find and reluctant to sign because he was hired by the contractor. So when it gets to a mess, it gets kind of messy. It's no longer about building the house. It's about untangling some of this mess.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, because that helps with, understanding that getting that decision as right as you can at the beginning really helps. And this last picture here, before they're finished, they ended up having to move in before they were finished and poured more of their contents money in there. So instead of a real dining room set, they ended up using their patio furniture. The backyard is very much in progress, and they actually hung their front door 2 months after they moved in. They just had they just had a piece of plywood nailed up on the inside until the door arrived. And so it made it very complicated. And we'll take a deep breath here. That's a lot to unpack. And now we're going to talk about that vetting and hiring a contractor. And so those first steps, as Doug was saying, it's a long-term relationship. So you want to pick someone that you're going to work well with. And they really need to, communicate well with you. Annie and Doug, like for you, just if you're comfortable just talking through this slide here.
Yeah, so somebody that we talked to at one point said, this is like a marriage, and you better like your contractor. You better have good communication with them. So if you're interviewing someone who you don't even like, it's probably a sign that you should move on. You have to do your homework, and it's more than just looking at the California State Licensing Board and seeing that they actually have a license that's current. You can also look at their bond to see if it's new or if they had to give it up because they went to mediation on another build. And that would be a red flag. You want to look at the Better Business Bureau. You want to ask them for previous builds that they did and talk to those people about how they navigated it. Were they happy with it? Did they come in on time? And did they not come in time because there was change orders or because the builder didn't get it done? I'm gonna say that with Doug's company, and then I'll let Doug speak. They have they're in contract with 210 Structural Warranty out of Colorado, and that doesn't mean they're a good builder. It means that they haven't had any complaints that would get them kicked off of that insurance. And then when they reinforce it by telling you that they take care of everything in-house, that is a great measuring tool.
All right. We do one price as well. So there's a bunch of things. But as far as vetting others, a couple notes I just wrote down is that general liability insurance is a big one, to make sure they have general liability insurance. And beyond that, workers' comp. Am I going too fast? But
You're right on point. Yeah.
Okay, so workers' comp to me is another indicator. If you don't have workers' comp that means you're acting as a sole contractor. And if you are, there's other the only way you can, in California anyway, the only way you can legally hire other workers is to hire them as general contractors with insurance themselves. So this is a chain that needs to stay linked. So there'll be a slight red flag, not continually. I've been on my own, long story, but I had 14 years. I did fire rebuilds myself as a general contractor. And there were times where I contracted everything out, and there was times that I had workers. So, but those questions is just something to ask the question. If you're not going to use your in-house folks, what you should do is, who is it going to be? And I'd like to know that they're insured and licensed. That should be part of your contract. That's just one little thing that I was grabbing as Annie was talking. I can't remember the other slide, so I don't know if there's more there, but I can go on for hours.
Yeah. Well, and if we have any questions, then we'll be able to do it.
Okay.
Annie, one of the notes is just to ask to be named as an additional insured, get copies of those certificates. You want to make sure your bids are comparable with similar scopes of work, so it's apples to apples. One of the helpful things is, do they have a project schedule, milestones that help you with the planning process, eliminate surprises? And are they exceeding state and local codes, or are they simply complying with the minimum requirements? And I think, Doug, here's one of the, how do you ensure quality of construction in the contract? And so those last two things we mentioned feed into that. Is there anything else to add there?
Yeah, if you touched on milestones. So milestones are two different things. There's a draw involved, meaning you're going to pay them at milestones. I don't know how the payments work, but the draws and how you pay and how much of a percentage you pay, if there isn't insurance involved, you should be very careful with that. It's really dramatic as a house goes up. I mean, Annie was, I think probably the most dramatic was the foundation, of course, because that's like something real and tangible. And then those sticks go up really fast. So it's really exciting. And it feels like the house is quite a bit along, and there's a lot of momentum at that point. And I've seen cases where people get ahead of themselves on payments. So the draw schedule, the milestones of completions, the percent completion, meaning how much of the home is done at a certain construction stage. You really don't want to get ahead of yourself on that. Back to the Annie comment with her contractor choosing one. I always had a statement I said with new folks as I did remodels or home construction for them. It was like, we're all getting along now. You love me. This is great. But I know at least 2 or 3 points during this process, you're going to be upset with me. So we're going to work through those things, meaning you're going to run out of money. It's not going fast enough. It's all of these things, because it's a very dramatic process, especially a rebuild. The emotions are high. But my line after that was always, I'm always going to keep going on your job regardless. You hired me to finish it. I'm going to make the people show up. When there's a mistake, we're going to fix it and we're going to proceed. And you really just have to understand and get that kind of feel for somebody. Some contractors, especially in this rebuild area, don't like conflict. And so when they get conflicting advice or they run away. And I've seen it, dealt with it. And you need to make sure those people are in. And that's when you're vetting them, you really want to ask those kinds of questions when you're asking them for their references. And if they don't have references, you really don't want to deal with them. You need to talk to somebody who's gone through it and the ups and the downs. And if somebody says it's perfect, I don't know about that, because it's not a perfect thing. It's an emotional process. Anyway.
All right, thank you. And Lisa, when we're
I'd
talking
like-
about, oh, go ahead,
I'd
Andy.
like to add, sorry, I'd like to add that it's not perfect. But what makes the difference between a good contractor and a bad contractor in my book is they make it perfect afterwards. So if they mess up something, it's that they fix it. They come back and they do whatever needs to be done, because there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be problems.
Right. In a standard build, there's 26 different vendors involved. So some people don't show up. You have expectations as a general of everybody doing their job, but when that doesn't happen, it's the general's responsibility to make up for that deficit. Doesn't mean the deficit didn't happen. It's just you have to get creative and or bounce people and get new people in to make the job proceed. So life of a general is pretty stressful on its own as well, and should be always an advocate for you and in your court.
All right, thank you. And Lisa, when we're talking about state and local codes, I know we're going to talk about that more later, but are you seeing, in your previous work and with the county of Boulder, I know you guys have put a lot of resources into helping people and contractors understand those codes. Do you find that they're embracing them, rejecting them, or just ignoring them?
That's a really good question. So I think that varies based on kind of the type of contractor that you hire, as well as their familiarity with the codes themselves. So speaking for the Marshall Fire, kind of area, one of the things to pay attention to is every community's codes are slightly different. And so making sure, and at least asking questions, I think, to make sure that your builder and you understand the high level kind of construct of what these codes require, and understanding, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, that what the building department's role is with enforcement of the codes doesn't necessarily equal quality of the codes, but I think it varies. And also know that the local jurisdictions are there to be that stopgap in making sure that the homes are constructed to code. So, but the codes do vary across every jurisdiction. They're always a little bit different, at least in Colorado.
Right. And Lisa, just to follow up, and then Doug, feel free to chime in later. These are when we were prepping for these are some of the other rebuild professionals. You said you're seeing that people are integrating as part of their team. So can you just talk briefly about how they plug in?
Yeah, so some folks take the path that Annie took, right, which is to hire a production builder and they're managing all of these, all of these folks. That's not everybody's path. Some people want a custom home, or they really want to be more involved in all of the components of rebuilding. And so generally, these are the types of professionals that would be part of your rebuild team. An architect, I think most of us know that role. They're going to be the ones that are designing, the structure itself. The surveyor is really key. So the surveyor is responsible for making sure that everyone knows where your property lines are and that your home gets constructed in the right location. And so your surveyor, you need a survey up front, but they're going to be an ongoing part of your team. They're going to come back throughout the process and make sure that everything is getting located properly. Civil engineer, in most cases, this is not required for any building permit. However, in some cases, depending on the topography of your lot, the disturbance of the property after debris removal, as well as making sure, just for your own safety and kind of ongoing maintenance of your property, that basically everything gets put back together so that your lot drains properly, that your architect and your builder and the people that are constructing your home know how high your home should be, so that it's both, you know, kind of looks proper, but it also is built correctly and isn't too tall at the end of the day. So a number of things there. It's not required, but if it's within your budget, I think it's certainly a nice step to consider. Work with your structural engineer and your architect through that. Geotechnical engineer, if you're not aware what that is, that's the person that's actually coming on site and testing your soil to understand what are the components of the structure of the soil on your lot itself, to know how your foundation should be designed. Do you need piers? What type of foundation is going to be the most stable on your particular lot? And then again, structural engineer, make sure that your home is standing for a really long time. So they're designing the foundation and kind of all of the wall connections, things like that. And then a pre-construction advocate might be something that you consider. And I'm going to let Doug talk about that one because that's more on the private building side.
Sure. And I would say, I guess I've had a lot of experience in some of these fire rebuild areas in various jurisdictions. Various customers built them myself or build for others. And my only point to saying that is back to Annie's slide where they were digging the first trenches for her foundation. There was a whole series of things that got that lot to that stage where that tractor could sit there and dig those trenches. And that's all primarily under the umbrella of pre-construction. Pre-construction is extremely important. It's also, I think, an open hole that money could pour into for people, because I think you don't know what those things should cost or could cost. Some of the pre-construction which should be tied up with engineers or others. So on one hand, it is extremely important, meaning you really should get the architect, civil engineer. It's a little bit out of order. What you need really is a topography first. So you get a topo, because after a fire, the demolition does not leave your lot in the same status it was. So we used to shoot lots prior to debris removal, because we can get corners of foundations and finished floor heights to at least advise that where the house could go. We could always move it, but these are all important things. So once you have those understandings of where the house was, and then debris removal occurs, you need to essentially bring in soil to put it back to where it should be. It's all very important, because if you're not starting from that kind of standpoint, you really could be building incorrectly, meaning too low, too high, other things that impact that. So I would strongly advise pre-construction. The same amount you put into the architecture, you should put into the soil. And I think it's and I've seen it time and again where people don't put anything into it, and a city or jurisdiction doesn't require civil engineering. So all you have is an architect who draws some lines on some paper, and the houses are not coming out the way they should. So hopefully that explained it without having my own seminar on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And then just a refresher really quickly for everyone. So for California, license resources are here on this page. Please take advantage of it. If you're having an issue, do file a complaint, check those licenses. Colorado, since Colorado doesn't require the contractor license state level, it's done at the local level. Here are the resources for you here. Remember, the slide deck is online, so you can get these links directly. And then for Marshall Fire specifically, you have very specific rebuilding resources. Lisa, anything you want to say about any of these?
Generally, I would say please contact these people that are in these offices if you have any questions at all. And just know that they are there to help you. And I think from their perspective, speaking as someone who served in that role, I would much rather spend a little bit of time up front answering your questions, because it saves a lot of time for, these staff when you come in for permit if things require resubmittals. So I would say definitely reach out to them. They are there to help you through the process. And just know that, their goal is to also get you home.
All right, and to wrap this section, we're just going to talk about contractor warning signs. And I'm going to pitch this to you, Doug, Annie, and Lisa, just any of these you want to talk about, and feel free to give that example of, because we really want people to be careful in this space.
I think all of us, probably have examples of stories of, folks who promised. I think that if it seems too good to be true, that one I think is always key. When some folks will tell me, hey, they said they can do this, and you push back. I think the other thing is always talk to, as many contractors, getting those references, talking to more than one company. I think, the ones that really make me nervous are the ones that say, I talked to one and they stopped there because they felt really good about that conversation. So those are just kind of my 2 points on that. What do you have, Doug?
I would say the business less than 3 to 5 years is something. Also, it's what I've noticed, especially in the Santa Rosa area. I'm out of Sacramento, and I built in Santa Rosa. So I will say, coming out from an outer area and a more of a production area, meaning Sonoma County, Santa Rosa's production, but it's nothing like Sacramento is. So I was able to bring some outside labor and reduce costs. So there is something to that. But the thing is, I was in business as a production home builder, building hundreds of homes a year. And came from that line. What I noticed in Santa Rosa was a lot of folks that maybe swung a hammer and built 1 or 2 a year and then ran up 24 or 25 contracts. And those people can do what they're good at, right? They have a framing crew, they roll from one to another, but then they kind of stumble when it's the electrician's turn or the plumber. There's being a GC and only framing, or being a GC in production home building is quite the difference. And I noticed that time and again in some of those areas where I think there's even good intentions, but people just didn't have the resources to get people to come to their jobs, which is really the key to being a general contractor, especially in Annie's case, 1 a day contracting. That's no joke. You need to have a backlog of vendors. And if those people aren't making it, you are replacing them, because production is what your mindset is, not just showing up and driving nails. So that's kind of my general feeling.
And I think
Yeah.
for those of you in the Marshall Fire rebuild area, at least that's happening every day out there. So we continue to hear stories of, homeowners who's the general contractor had to replace a subcontractor. We are seeing just with the labor situation out there. So some of these resources later about what to do if you have issues with your builder, we'll talk about those, but it's tricky. It's a hard thing. And I would say, trying to be as diligent as you can and making the good choice up front, the best you can, will absolutely serve you well in the long run.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that in our area, we had a lot of people, we had the same contractors over and over saying, how much is in your insurance? I can build for that. And that's a huge red flag. Just because they know how much you have in your insurance should not be what they build to or what they're committing to. And quite frankly, most of those people that signed with that kind of a builder got hosed in the end. They did not have enough resources to finish the build. Things were done kind of shoddy to save money. So you want a contract from a real contractor who knows what it takes to put together a house properly.
And that leads right into our next section about contracts. And Doug, I'll hit the highlights, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. And so at the high level, it should outline the scope of the work, the price, what the points of completion and payment are, structure it, and I'll let you talk about structuring that draw. Big thing to be aware of for everyone is that an estimate is not a legal document. So that's not going to be of help to you if there are problems. You're looking for that contract, and be wary of a contractor who wants full or cash payments before the job begins.
Right.
California limits you to a deposit of $1,000 or 10%, whichever is less. And then one of the things we do recommend is consider that builder's risk policy. And then Doug, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, the get ahead part is really just from witnessing others that you could see from the previous conversation. These folks, I think most of them good intentioned people trying to do rebuild work, getting out ahead of themselves. They're not bookkeepers in the end, so they get multiple jobs, start multiple things. They're used to much less pace. The person in the office may or may not be equipped to hold everyone accountable to what they're supposed to be doing and when they pay. So if somebody is not built with essentially a strong finance department, meaning they are just as strict as you are in your billing, just the one person trying to do it all, this is where they really get in trouble. And when they do, they'll most likely come asking for more money from their jobs in order to keep proceeding. That is a huge red flag. Most of the cost comes in the end. So framing and concrete are substantial costs, but really once you get to the tile and the tubs and the finishes. So if somebody's asking for money at the frame stage or appears to be running out, it's a massive red flag, because if there isn't anything in the tank at that point, how's the cabinet guy get paid, etc. Those are all really big deals. So back to the contracting, this should be, don't get ahead of it. So framing and concrete is X, and then drywall is X. I would even say you can set the timeline to jurisdictional inspections. It's what I've done when I've done reporting on my superintendents, is when does a gravel inspection, the city or county or jurisdictional person signs off on that. There's a date. Did that occur? So if you could set your contract to those dates of as the home progresses. So gravel's one. There's a shear inspection for when the framing's done. Then it's a really sticky area that's gotten more and more important, because there's a lot of cost that goes into it. There's the time frame between shear inspection and frame inspection, where the plumber comes in, the HVAC, fire sprinklers, all those folks. That's when they come in. It doesn't look like much is happening in the house, but a lot is. But again, there are inspection dates that could be tied to your contract and could be tied to payments. And I'm not sure if it's in here, but there are holdbacks you could do as well. As far as the house can be done with a 10% holdback for a certain amount of time. That's done, not commonly, but it's done. So it's something that could also be requested in advance of what that could be. And I don't think if somebody's really balking at some of these, I think that's where the flags start to come up.
And Lisa, from the jurisdiction standpoint, I saw you nodding your head with what he was saying there.
Yeah, I do think, a lot of people I think to Doug's point, a lot of people get very excited when they see the walls go up, and not realizing that how much work happens with, electrical, HVAC, plumbing. And it feels a little slow at that point. It's just those contractors are doing, fairly complicated work all in throughout the home. And that's why the framing inspection comes at the end of all that work, so that the building inspectors can make sure that frame, is still sound, and that all of these other trades, haven't impacted it. So that's kind of why that's at the end. So just from a patient's perspective, just know, I think that there is a lot of work happening, even though it feels like you've slowed way down. But I really like Doug's idea of tying payments to actual inspections for completion of that work. And if you need to reach out to your local jurisdictions, to get a list of what all those inspections are, they're happy to provide that. So reach out to those jurisdictions on how to partner on that.
And I'll add to this that I think we need to know what our limitations are as the the consumer, fire survivors, disaster survivors, and that we need to bring in the big guns when we need to. So hire a contract attorney to review your contract, because really we're not well versed in what should be in there, what shouldn't be in there, and that will help you out immensely.
And that leads directly into this next slide, contract review considerations. As Annie said, we're not providing legal advice here. We're just, our experts are sharing their experience with people in the field. And Annie, her own personal experience. These are things that are recommended. But please do consider having someone, hiring that professional help when needed for contract review, inspections, etc. Doug, anything you want to add to this or explain of either what's there or what isn't there?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I don't know if I've already said it is the thing. Notice of completions, it's a California thing, but you actually can, legally, there's a notice of completion. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I filed them as a contractor, and there are holdbacks. Notice of completion essentially is the start date of the lien releases. So there's liens that can be filed on properties by anyone who's a general contractor, the roofer, the drywaller. There's a whole process to liens and a legal vein of notifications during the construction process and the timing. So the roofer will do pre-liens, and then we'll do releases of those liens as he gets paid. Those can and should be part of what you're looking at as the house is completed and you're making payments, is meaning the release of the lien means the contractor, the subcontractor, has been paid and is satisfied in his payment. And that's the ongoing. And then at the end is a notice of completion, which says I'm all done, and here it is, county or jurisdiction, and here's a recorded document, and that starts a clock where after a certain amount of time, the liens can no longer be filed. So you can tie some of your last payments to that notice of completion and the release of that notice of completion date, meaning once it passes that expiration date, you're free of any liens being filed for the construction of your home.
All right, let's keep moving here. Here are the state of California has a just general contract guide for consumers. It's a great tool for anybody. Please feel free, no matter what state you're in. It just outlines some best practices to be aware of, that level of detail that we were talking about earlier. And then we're going to go into permits next. And Lisa and Doug, these are the best practices that we've outlined. If you would share a little bit about that, because we just want people to understand that permitting time becomes longer if they find any problems in plan check, and it has to go back for revision. So if you guys could speak to this, I would greatly appreciate it.
Sure. So again, every jurisdiction does this a little bit differently. Their codes are a little bit different. I mean, while the overall process, is fairly similar across the board, being sure to understand within each community what documentation is needed for your submittal. That's, kind of just make sure you have awareness of that. Most communities that are rebuilding, if you're, might not be very well organized, if you're, kind of one of these really first ones out of the gate like Annie, but I think if you're a little later in the, into the process, most communities have figured this out. Start by checking their websites, absolutely give them a call. Also make sure that whoever you're using, that, you've made clear that they really understand the requirements for the local jurisdiction. Again, sources for getting this documentation, that's really where your whole team comes in if you are kind of going it alone. So understanding what your survey requirements are, what your structural engineer, and then what specific local requirements are there. So within, Boulder County, there's some environmental things that need to be submitted. Within Louisville, we had a lot of undermining. So undermining information, was your property undermined, things like that. So every community, in addition to kind of the really standard items, might have some very specific things that your permit will either get rejected or would be delayed if you don't include. Timing of application. So every community again is probably a little bit different on this, but just go in knowing that they are not going to turn it around in a day, but having an understanding of roughly how long that's going to take. And I would say, I know it's really tempting, but it's probably not helpful to call them every day. You know, where's my permit at in review? How long, when do you expect to get it? Where is it in the process? Most communities have an online portal or some other way that you can kind of track and make sure it's working through. And kind of what I've always suggested is if you haven't heard, you know, if you've been told like, oh, the permit review time is 2 to 3 weeks, once you get to that 2 to 3 week period, if you haven't heard, you know, feel free to make a call if it'll just help you sleep better at night, especially if it starts, you know, getting outside of that expected time frame. I would say it's very appropriate to reach out to your jurisdiction and check on the status of the permit. And find out what's missing. Sometimes what will happen is the city would provide comments on a permit, and that either your contractor, your architect maybe can't quite get to it yet, but if you call them, they might say, oh, the city still has it. That's where you can call us and we can help validate that for you. Whose hands is this in right now? Is it back in your professional's hands or is it in the city's hands? We want to share that information so you have good information. As far as inspections go, the building inspectors are absolutely there to protect you and make sure that you are getting a product that meets building codes. It doesn't mean that you are getting a product that the trim work is maybe extremely precise and the quality of the paint job is, you know, there's no drips anywhere, things like that. But their job is primarily to make sure that the construction of the home meets the minimum building code. So, or whatever code and requirements you have specs. So does it match the structural engineering drawings? Does it match, you know, the framing? Is it sited in the right location? Things like that. So there's a difference between quality of construction and what an inspector is going to do. It's helpful to kind of know that difference. Addressing and resolving problems. I think there's some pros and cons. Just know from the city's from the jurisdictional perspective, whoever applies for the permit owns the permit. That might mean then that you have to be the one to call in or at least manage the inspections with your contractors. So there's might be some more work involved with being the one who pulls the permit. However, the benefit of that is if you run into an issue, then you have full control over who you can hire and who you can release. Sometimes from time to time, a homeowner will allow a contractor to pull it, which again, might be fine. You just need to know that. And then they make a decision to no longer work with them and release them from the contract. That contractor then has to actually contact the jurisdiction and release that permit to someone else. And so sometimes they either don't want to do that. Sometimes it can take some time. So there's definitely risk with letting somebody else pull your permit. Doug, why don't you chime in on whatever else?
And back to Annie's 20 a month builder, this is where you could really get some advantage. So we as a contractor, we're full service, so all of this we would bring into house and to get all of it's shepherding all these civil engineers and structurals, and it's almost just like the same intensity as building the home is really getting it prepared. It's all again into pre-construction, where you get all these folks to create the set of plans and the document stack that you apply with, and then there's issues that come up, and then it's how you respond to those issues, meaning the engineering doesn't really relate to this or that. So in Annie's case, she had a predetermined plan that they, I'm sure, had pre-engineering on. So I'm assuming that in that case, when you're using that avenue for building, it's going to be much quicker. I was part of building 20 houses in Paradise, and we had a master plan in Paradise that I was able to get a permit on in 2 days. And all I needed was a civil plan, or essentially it wasn't even a civil drawing. It was just the outline of where the house would go on the lot. I would apply for it and literally get the permit in 2 days if I built the same house again. So there are some advantages, and especially in the rebuild areas, in California anyway, they set up the resiliency centers that really turn around permitting, and access is wide open from its normal operating business platform. So these resiliency centers are full of information and full of help for everyone, including the contractor, and only want to do the right thing as fast as they possibly can. So In some of these areas when you combine all of that, you can really get some fast turnarounds, and really get these things. When in a normal process where it'd be months, it would be literally days.
Well, thank you both. And that feeds right into code considerations, because I know this is an issue in both Colorado and California, that codes are increasing, especially focus on energy efficiencies. And that's always a question, especially when people are underinsured, how can they afford that? And so, so much of that depends on the jurisdiction and talking to them. So Lisa, if you don't mind talking about that, and then Doug, anything you can add to that, especially talking about those individual call outs for those code considerations that people might be grappling with.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the key takeaway here is, at least in Colorado, because we don't have a statewide building code, every jurisdiction, adopts building codes, but they all make what are kind of local amendments, right? So they might be tweaking things here and there based on what the professionals at the city believe is kind of the best application of the code for that context. So some codes might require installation of solar. Some might be what's called solar ready, which is just kind of the electrical system and the structural system of your house can accommodate solar. Check to make sure on fire sprinklers. That's certainly not required in every jurisdiction, but it's good to know. You also can add these things. So even if it's not required by code, the jurisdictions know what to do if this is something you want to include. But I think the key is just making sure that you and your builders really understand the details of the differences in each code. And septic wasn't a thing for me in the past, so I'm not going to speak to this one.
Septic was my own. So yeah, septic was something, again, it's in Paradise, so there was no sewer in Paradise. So all of the rebuilds are on septic systems, with a very conscientious market, meaning there's not that much money to rebuild those houses. So septic, under current California code, if they were to have to meet that code, they would be unable to rebuild in Paradise, quite honestly. So they made some considerations that you have to inspect the septic, etc. But if you're essentially building roughly the same size with the same bedroom count, you were able to reutilize with repairs the septic systems without meeting new guidelines, which really it saved it, quite honestly. Solar is another one. It's become more and more prevalent in the new construction here, with more and more requirements. The systems are getting larger and larger, and when you're in a real thin margin situation, or you don't have much money in directs, solar would become burdensome. So solar was grandfathered out for a number of years. Santa Rosa kept it, I think, for 3 years, and it's just came in. I'm not sure some of the other areas, but some of these are really quite, the fire sprinklers, depends on the area. If it's in a market that they currently are in, they're getting relatively aggressive with their pricing. So sprinklers, not as much. We're having to put those in every house we did, but solar and septic were the big ones that really saved some of the rebuild.
All right. And Lisa, we have a question for you in the Q&A. So what happens if your permit expires a second time?
Yeah, I
Address
just
that?
saw
Yeah.
that. I was typing a response. So just more broadly, I'll address Lisa's question. Hi, Lisa. I do see some names in there from folks that I know tonight. And so happy that we can spend some time together this evening. But generally, building permits are valid for a period of 6 months, at least within Colorado, from when you submit. I would say before they expire, if you run into a hiccup with actually starting, getting that permit finished or starting construction, I think the first thing to do is certainly reach out to your jurisdiction. And broadly, the reason why they expire, just to know this, is if the codes change in a period of time from when you apply to when you actually start construction, at some point they want to say, like, okay, you've taken long enough, we need to get you up to date with the new code. It's usually at the discretion of someone there at staff. There are some points, though, at which they might say you just need to reapply, which is, kind of submitting everything again. Or you could ask for an extension if you explain your circumstances. You know what, we're still waiting for this one issue to get resolved. Can we have another extension? What would it take to have another extension? What do you need to see to give us another extension? Or do we just need to, kind of upload everything again? And then you can change who's in charge of your permit. Again, this is where, depending on who pulled the permit, the person who pulled it initially would have to authorize the release of that. And if your permit's about to expire, that might be a reason to let it go ahead and expire so that whoever you'd prefer to work with moving forward can then go ahead and apply, or you as a homeowner could go ahead and apply for that permit to get it reestablished, and that way you have control over it. So again, the local jurisdiction is usually the best one to help you through that, but I'm sorry to hear, Lisa, that you're still getting that wall designed. Do you remember the wall?
All right, let's keep going here. Deep breath. And Doug, we do this because it just gets overwhelming, because it's
Oh, I bet.
technical for people who weren't basically planning to build a house. So so we're going to talk about builder's risk, and Annie, this is all things all you. I'm going to turn it over to you.
So we had the fortune of being able to talk to kind of an expert on the builder's risk and vetting him out. And builder's risk is normally, and Doug, you can correct me on any of this, normally put in place by the builder, but the homeowner is the person who pays for that insurance. It's preferable that the builder takes out the limits and takes out the actual policy, because then they know what they're insured for. It's going to cover the components of your house before they're put in. It's going to cover anything that could happen, because you're going to have insurance, but you're not going to have insurance for the contents, for the liability, you're going to have liability insurance. You're not going to have it for everything. And this will cover if your cabinets get delivered, if your cabinets are ready and your builder doesn't go and pick them up, but the cabinet shop burns down, those cabinets are yours. And so that would cover something like that. If they get delivered, but they're not secured, they don't have time to put those windows in, they've been delivered, they get stolen, that will cover it. It's really important to have that. A lot of theft happens after a disaster. And this key component is huge. You also want to know that putting anything inside the house, moving in prematurely, putting things in the garage because you were supposed to get your final occupancy, but it didn't happen. There's some things that have to be done. The moving truck's coming. And you say, oh, we'll just put everything in the garage. Unless you have a special part of this that will allow you to do that 30 days before, you can navigate that. There'll be a special option. But if you don't have that, that voids out your builder's risk policy. So if all that stuff is stolen, you're out of luck. If you've done this and you have a fire, you're out of luck, because you do not have full coverage on your house yet. So knowing what you're lacking, you're not going to put that full coverage for the structure or for your contents until you're completed. So the builder's risk is a big bridge for you in ensuring that you're covered all the way around. Did I miss anything on that?
No, but if stuff's sitting around a long time, that's probably not a good thing. The window shouldn't be sitting there. So, but no, I think that covers it.
All right. Yeah, and Annie, I just put a little summaries section in the chat for everyone. So just to highlight what you had said there. And Annie, you're still on, because we're going to jump into fund control.
Fund control is really important in your rebuild. One of the ways that you can ensure So what I tell people right after disaster is that the insurance company is going to pay your dwelling coverage to your mortgage company. And in doing so, you want to make sure your mortgage company does not pay off your mortgage. You may not get the same interest rate. You may not qualify for that loan again. But in the big picture, it will offer you some safety net. So because it's an escrow account through your mortgage company, they will send out inspectors to inspect, not for necessarily quality, but for milestones. Doug talked about that a little bit earlier. And milestone A, B, and C is done. They are going to release the check. This will ensure that you never get ahead of payments with your builder. This makes sure that your builder cannot hold you emotionally hostage when they run out of money and they say to you, you know, if I can't have any more money, I'm stuck here. I can't continue with your house. And for survivors, that's a trigger. We're like, okay, here, let me write that darn check because I want to go home. This takes that completely out of your hands. And if your builder was to walk at 50% completion, you would still have 50% of the money to finish your build. Many people in Coffey Park did not have fund control. And so what ended up happening is if they did have a builder who could not bridge that gap, they might be at 50% completion and the builder might have 80% of the money. And then they had to figure out how they could rob Peter to pay Paul to finish their build. And it wasn't pretty. They also will, if you have a construction loan, they'll also navigate that the same way.
Right.
So same thing. Sorry. I'm
No,
on my
you're
phone.
you're right on. Yeah.
So you really just want to make sure that you have those conversations, you understand how that's going to work, and that somebody else is pulling the trigger on releasing those funds. You know, hopefully in the big picture, your builders has enough financial backing that they don't need money ahead of time. They should always be working behind and then paid upon completion.
Right. And Doug mentioned that earlier. You don't want them getting ahead. And because you don't have that expertise in this area, it's easy to pay them more money than the percentage of the build completed. So that guidance from Doug and Lisa earlier is very key in here. One of the points just to call out that interest earned on that restricted escrow account should be paid to you when the account is closed. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae guidance says that they must deposit the insurance loss proceeds in an interest-bearing account. Those proceeds are dispersed to you afterwards. California law has a little more prescriptive thing. So take it, ask about that. A lot of times the mortgage companies aren't paying attention to that guidance. They've got a lot of rules they follow on multiple things, so do be aware of that. Annie, and then we're going to move over to quality control.
Yeah, so after everything that we went through in our rebuild, kind of the formula that stood out to me to have some sort of quality control was a combination of, you know, having your contract reviewed by a contract attorney, hiring a private inspection company who generally will come out and do 2-3 inspections. They'll do foundation, close-in, and final. And doing the escrow account. So it just offers you another layer of protection. As we discussed earlier, Lisa talked about, you know, that there's a quality that they have to adhere to for the codes. But really, if you want quality all the way around in your house, you probably want an eye on things from someone who understands what it is supposed to look like, because we don't know that. We don't have a clue. Temporary occupancy as opposed to final occupancy. A lot of people got temporaries because, you know, the city and the county were trying to get people home for the holidays, you know, get them back into their house. You kind of lose some of your leverage by taking that temporary occupancy with your builder, because they're not as quick to finish your house. The time frame, it's no longer about getting that final payment because you're going to go home. They can kind of draw that out so that it becomes problematic. And then the lien releases we discussed also. When you get your house, those should all be in a tidy little bundle, and you should know that at that point that everything has been taken care of. I'm sure that Lisa and Doug can speak on this topic also, though.
Yeah, I was going to add, so I think every jurisdiction might have a different policy or practice when it comes to issuing temporary occupancy permits or really waiting until everything is done. And so I think it's really helpful if you're feeling rushed, given, you know, we are coming up, you know, at least in the Marshall Fire context, coming up on that 2 years with your ALE, or if you you need to be out of your rental by a certain day, making sure that you really clearly understand what that jurisdiction allows as far as occupancy prior to everything being done. And whether or not they issue a temporary occupancy permit. And so just know that the distinction means that, you know, a certificate of occupancy, everything meets code. The temporary one means it's not done, but we're willing to allow you to move in. And usually that would still require, you know, kind of all of the life safety and everything is still closed in. So every jurisdiction is a little bit different. Check with them if you have questions.
I would add, I truly dislike temporary occupancy. It is a false narrative. It's not anything other than we think we might maybe. I would advise the other way. I know how tempting and exciting it is to get into your home, but moving into an incomplete home is a recipe for nothing but ongoing issues. So if there is a rental situation, I would always add 30 days to whatever completion date. And as those milestones, back to the milestones, those milestone dates, once they're achieved, should be recasting the schedule, the construction schedule, which may or may not maintain throughout the entire life of the construction. Meaning, don't rush the finish. I've built thousands of homes for national home builders, regional home builders, hundreds of homes a year. We had Annie's 20 a month again. We had that in one subdivision, one case, and we had 8 or 10 subdivisions going. So I built a lot of homes. The point is, we always, as a profession, the best customer always came out of completed homes, meaning we had a walkthrough orientation. From that orientation became a list or no list of items. Those items were then finished 100%, signed off again at another move-in with another clean, and then the home is yours. I would strongly suggest not moving into an incomplete home. There are so many things that, I'll put it this way, it is, from the contractor side, it is very easy to get a certificate of occupancy on an incomplete home. In most cases, jurisdictions, you don't need flooring. In some other jurisdictions, you only need the cooking surface, you don't need a dishwasher. I mean, there are so many things that you don't need: towel bars, towel rings, etc. The home should be 100% complete, all screws in place, walked for quality. In California, it's really becoming, with so many inspections at the end now with HERS and other things, or rating systems for efficiencies. From the completion, the true completion, you're going to sit there and talk about being frustrated. The home's going to be 100% looking perfect and clean. It's going to take 10 days of inspections to get that thing done. With an issue that pops up, it might be 15. It's really a hard time, I know, but please be patient on the completion. If you think, remember one thing, pre-construction, and don't move into an unfinished home, and work out your rental situation so you don't have that pressure to move into a home that somebody's not finished with.
Well,
Great.
thank you for that. I'm gonna pop on this last slide, which this is just to help you navigate if your lender is stalling on paying your contractor. You're gonna look for this kind of info, sorry about that. And now we're just gonna morph right into paying your builder. So for this one, you really want to start off on the right foot, right? You want to remember who works for whom. You want to keep it professional, but you keep it, don't be afraid to over communicate. When in doubt, ask. And remember, these two factors matter in construction, right? Time and money. The more you have of one, the less you have of the other. So you need to plan ahead. Beware of material deposits. And I am going to ask Doug and Lisa and Annie, anything to add? I will add one thing before I turn you over. David Gurley's quote is, "Pizza for the crew on Friday is fine, never bring the beer."
I think that's a great quote. Donuts on a Monday morning also can be helpful. I think, yeah, some encouragement from time to time, but yeah, I agree. Keep communicating. Don't hesitate to also reach out to the city if you have questions. They're there on your behalf and want to make sure that, I would say some builders get frustrated if the homeowners call the city inspectors. I would say call the city inspectors if you have a question. And I can let Doug, I think, probably speak to, his side of that story. But I think from this jurisdiction's perspective, we're happy to answer homeowner questions if they have any questions on what might be happening out there.
I would also say, well, water and Gatorade on hot days is probably the best. But the remember who works for whom. Again, especially if you're going to be a production builder, if you're going to be the most efficient, cost-effective builder, you're going to be using multiple vendors and trades. Those multiple vendors have multiple employees doing the work. So I caution anyone from creating relationships that are not with the direct general contractor. There's a lot of folks who are drilling holes for an electrician that kind of think they're an electrician already and have a bunch of opinions about how electrical works. That may or may not be the person that owns the company, manages the team, and can start to undermine the relationship. Make sure the relationship primarily stays with the general contractor. Any questions, wide open, but I caution as folks like to go into their house and meet and greet and even talk people into doing things. You have to be really careful of that. Everyone, if they're, again, efficient and professional, need to keep and run tight business models. So running extra cables, running extra things, those all are, talk about red flags. If a company is allowing that to happen, you should be careful of yourself, because that kind of discipline is required for these things to be efficient. Is that in there somewhere else? Sorry.
Well, I moved to the next slide because you're talking about some of those pieces we want people to be aware of when they're balancing their budget and their bottom line. And so feel free, Doug, to jump in here. The big things are planning ahead, pick everything you possibly can think of, working with your contractor as far in advance as possible, because supply and demand is a huge issue. I know for Marshall Fire folks, when they were first signing contracts, that, it was the appliances might take, because the supply chain issues might have taken a year. During COVID, the 2020 fires, people were ordering windows and expecting them 18 months out. It was just, and things, while they've adjusted, they're not
Garage
great.
door. Right.
Yeah.
And even in the garage door sense, jurisdictions would help out, and they would allow plywood for closing on the garage. So there was some bending there. There was understanding. That was quite a nightmare for production, for sure.
Yeah.
And for me, or for us, and me personally, I like to have all selections made prior to starting. And I know that's a kind of a dramatic, but even in the home building days, we picked everything before we started a house, and then we changed potentially along the way, or materials would run out. That's always a potential. But the more that we could know in advance of where everything goes and what it's going to be when it gets there, that way we can order in the right time frame. So cabinets, right now I'm working on a 12 to 16 week cabinet pre-order, which means I'm ordering that cabinet right at start. So it doesn't seem like it, the house isn't ready for it, but we're contracting and getting those things ordered and finalized So things like cabinet drawings, when they go back and forth and the house is barely framed, some of the customers are a little lazy on getting back to these things, but all those days and weeks could in fact impact the delivery if there is a slip in their production and they take the next place in line. So really making decisions and kind of following that game plan, hopefully laid out by the builder, was really, really helpful. All these decisions, as many before we start, is what I like to get.
Right. And then that feeds into the whole concept of a change order, knowing that if you've made all these decisions and then you change your mind, you're going to spend more money and it's going to take more time, because if you wanted to swap out the garage door, now we have to order it. How long is it going to take? All of those pieces feed into this.
Right.
And then let me go to the next slide. So managing the insurance funds, and this goes hand in hand in this process, right? So again, structuring that contractor agreement draw schedule to be consistent with, at least, or ideally more favorable than, your lender disbursement, following, if you're able to follow what Doug said, lining it up with your jurisdiction inspections, and because that will help you keep the contractor from getting ahead. And then there's a link in here on a publication for what to do with checks from your insurance company that's related to the building process. So please take advantage of that information. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to quit talking for a second. Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit of the tricky stuff about the cost saving strategies for rebuilding. Annie, feel free to jump in here at any point on these. We've got a list here of some strategies that other people have done.
Mm-hmm. So, the master plans is what I used for my house. A lot of builders will use those. And as Doug chimed in, it is a quick process in the permitting because they've had them approved already. Group rebuilds, a lot of those were navigated where they'd have a builder who would come in and build the whole neighborhood or build the majority of the neighborhood and maybe offer a different great room or an extra bedroom, something unique. But again, you're buying in bulk, so you're keeping the cost down. Their floor plans on .com. We have some of the rural communities who definitely have looked into that. You can create a income-based unit, an in-law unit, a granny unit, an ADU behind your house, and then build your house as you have more resources. And then you have a rental income. Just know that it has its own problems in the sense of your property taxes and your insurance will go up. A lot of people thought, oh, I just have an income here. And then they realized that they didn't have a protected property tax anymore. Tiny homes, it's another way to go. Again, they have to be taken off their wheels or they have to have skirting to actually get some sort of insurance. And they're not something that you can live in. They don't age well with you. So if you have any disabilities, they would be really for the young and for people who were just navigating the major build and living in that temporarily. The landscaping, do-it-yourself succulents. We had a poor gal who let succulents grow and grow and grow in her backyard so that everybody in the neighborhood could have some in their yard and not have to pay for landscaping, because that's kind of your final thing that you're putting in, and you might be out of resources at that point. Succulents, they'll just keep reproducing. To this day, it's been 6 years and she's still trying to get rid of some of those. But it is a key factor in you go in together, you get some ideas of how you can navigate and save money wherever you can.
Yeah, that feeds into the self-performing tasks too, working.
Yeah.
If you're severely underinsured, you might be able to work out like that landscaping is something you're doing, the contractor is not, but it's got to be recognized in the contract. And then you're taking that liability for that piece as well.
Right. And you can't, in many areas, you can't move into a house without having some sort of landscaping. So you need to find out what that is, because you won't get final occupancy without it in some areas.
I could add one thing to that last slide real quick. Just make sure, at least in Colorado, that you understand if an ADU is permitted on your property. So they're not permitted everywhere. You may want to consider adding one if you're thinking about it. The regulations might change in the future, but know that going in. Same one thing with tiny homes. Not every jurisdiction allows tiny homes, or there are different regulations for manufactured homes, things like that. So before you go down too far down those paths, understand what's required in your community.
Right. And especially if you have a mortgage and you're using those funds, sometimes that will cause you have to work with your lender to see as well what they will allow you to use those funds for. So calling that out, because we've seen that problem happen for people before. Annie, the next slide is you.
I had one on that last one too, so.
Go ahead.
But I was going to key in more on the design decisions, as I'm an estimator and I price things all the time. So there are decisions you can make as you build your structure. So the structure is essentially a wooden structure with a concrete and a roof, etc. So once that structure is up, though, a lot of the cost comes in the finishes, from the quartz tops and there are many items you could save. So my example would be a secondary or third bathroom. Maybe doesn't have to have tiled walls. You can use the plastic inserts and always remodel those later. That's a savings up to $8,000 to $10,000 in California. So there are ways that you could economically utilize and go through the home and be very decisive and pick what your battle is going to be. A stove that may only go for a few years, or things like that you could really do some significant savings. A lot of these finishes, if you go from a builder grade to the first level above builder grade, is quite a significant step in most products. So if you look at, if you could tolerate it, but if you look at some of those ideas, vinyl flooring is totally out of fashion, but you could vinyl floor a bathroom for pennies of what it would cost to tile. So some of those options, as you go through the home with your builder and make selections, you may be very strategic and surprised at how much you could save. In an entry level sense, you're probably down there already. I'm talking more the move up or the even the custom kind of situations where people really just want this large structure. Getting that up is a certain cost, but then filling it up with stuff is really the expense on it.
Yeah, and I threw in the chat two things that in my fire, the 07 fire people did. One was just working with the architect who designed multiple roof elevations and realizing that roof was going to cost $250,000, or she could have a much more simpler roof for about a third of the cost.
Right. Or the comp roof versus the metal roofs, or some of these exterior features they're gorgeous and attractive, but and of course you need to design the home you need to, but some of the additions the architects will put on will really have some significant cost to it. So comp roofs, of course, and then even moving down into the, up into the dimensional, it starts to double in cost in some of the material. So just be open to some of those ideas if possible.
All right. Well, let me, Doug and Annie, just if you'll touch on group master plan rebuilds, what people are looking for here.
I think Annie kind of covered this a little bit, but yes, the more efficient, really most economical is to use a plan if you can, if it's within your desires. But the most efficient is to utilize a master plan, which means it's a pre-approved plan at the jurisdiction, already pre-engineered. For us, it's Title 24 for the energy efficiencies. Sprinkler design is done. All of these things that add time and cost to a custom home are already, they're ready-made. All you really need is the lot to go under it, meaning the civil plan goes under it. We put the house on it, design the foundation according to the soils, and then build that same house. It's a much, much quicker turnaround. And we know what the house costs as well. So a master plan will be understood budget wise. So it's going to be a much more understood starting point than a custom that may or may not grow in scope and cost.
Right, thank you. And then these design cost savings to consider, while you might look at these and think they're going to add to the cost, these are upgrades that are actually much less expensive to do when you rebuild rather than retrofitting later. So it's the exact opposite of what Doug was saying about, putting this in the bathroom now and renovate later and fix it. So these would be things that could provide a cost savings for you to incorporate into your rebuild.
Anything behind the drywall. So alarm systems or cables and low voltage, all of those things. Even if some of those Wi-Fi, we used to do a base system and a lower end product for us, where we would have the smart home kind of technology where the brains were there and the wires were spread out. And then all you had to do was add components later to maximize those things. So just create these starting points that you can add on to.
All right, thank you for Doug. And Annie, collective bargaining, things to help drive down some of those costs.
So this is something that we kind of started brainstorming on after rural areas would struggle to rebuild. And, everybody doesn't have to use the same contractor, but they all have to have the same subs come in. And if you're going to struggle to get a sub to come in to do one roof, what does 10 look like? It's always a possibility that you can work with your builder and find subs who will give you a little bit of a discount. Maybe you all use the same solar company, or 7 out of 10 do. Your fencing, your sprinkler systems. Just a way of trying to cut the cost a little bit and to entice the builder to come in. Because quite frankly, in a lot of these areas, there may not be enough of an incentive to come in and build one house or two houses. But if you can get someone to navigate all that and then get these subs in to hopefully time frame wise it works to do their jobs, it's a little bit more advantageous for everybody. And I think Doug could speak to this a little bit too.
Yeah, they're just the ones on the critical path I'd be critical of. So my overall job is to manage the flow of the home and get it started. And every room, every house, every day, something happens, right? So if I have a plumber that's an unknown quantity in the potential, that would be a red flag to me. So I'd have to vet these individuals as the overall responsible party. But things like solar panels, if I pre-wire it and the solar guy comes through later, after final, that's not critical path for me. Soils testing is not critical path. Fencing, nope. Landscaping, nope. So those kinds of vendors, they're great. But the ones that I need to show up on a certain day to keep things going, I would probably be more cautious of myself. I'm always willing to use, when I go into new areas, I especially want to use the local folks. They know a lot of the things and a lot of the people and the inspectors already. It's all very helpful. But when in doubt, I'll bring in my own guys just to get the job done. So I just come from a different standpoint.
No, and that's okay. It's good to hear all the different voices.
All right, we're going to move over to building code upgrades, ordinance and law coverage. So what's included in code upgrades? From an insurance standpoint, the language is going to vary, so read your policy. But this is that coverage that pays you the amount to bring the home that you lost up to current building codes within your available policy limits. So it means things that were not there but need to be, right, to gain that occupancy. So think sprinklers, the energy efficiencies. If you were if you were opting to purchase and you're going to upgrade that new home, that amount's going to come from that. This is usually paid as incurred, so you're going to have those expenses usually, and then usually you have to show that the city, county will enforce the codes to get payment. And then Lisa, just wanted to ask you to describe what your city did when you were working on the Marshall Fire, and I can go ahead and go to the next slide if that's helpful.
So with respect to like the energy code options, is that what you're
Yes,
referencing?
code upgrades and
Sure.
how you handled it, yeah.
Sure. So I think, you know, initially, we always, I think, recognize that folks who are recovering from a disaster they didn't choose this experience and they're coming in, you know, not knowing maybe what the differences in codes are. Generally speaking, you know, depending on when your home was built, just because it was built there and it was lost in a disaster doesn't mean you can rebuild it back to that code. You have to rebuild it back to the code that's currently in place. And so within the Marshall Fire rebuilds, there are varying options available to you, depending on whether or not you own the property at the time of the disaster and kind of which energy code you have to meet. So which energy efficiency standard. The good news with that is that a lot of the partner agencies, including Excel, the State Energy Office, and some others have offered incentives to build to those higher energy codes to help cover the gap. So rebuildingbetter.org, that was on the previous slide, but they're a great resource and they're offering, you know, kind of free assistance to help you understand how to achieve those energy codes. The thing to be careful with on this is make sure that you understand the cost difference. So say you're going for Energy Star 3.2 and you know what the incentive that's offered, make sure that you and your builder both understand that cost difference to achieve, you know, if you want to achieve this incentive, what's that actual cost and does it make financial sense for you? Does that incentive going to cover it? Or if it's not, you know that going in. So make sure that you're aware of those incentives, but you know the actual cost. Generally speaking, you know, your homes today are going to be built with 2x6s instead of 2x4s. Everything electrical is going to be a little more robust. Fire prevention within the home is going to be more robust, whether or not we require fire sprinklers. Be sure to check with that. VOC limitations, those are not necessarily within building codes, but they are within some of those programs like, you know, Zero Energy Ready or Energy Star 3.2. And those are really the chemicals that your building materials are off-gassing for a period of time. So again, all a little bit different. Understand the cost impact to the code choices that you're making.
Got it. Doug, do you want to talk about anything to add to the VOC limitations?
The way I understand the code upgrade is, at least this part of it, is it's additional monies from the insurance company separate from the rebuild policy. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
So as you break these out, there's some uniquenesses. There's strong walls and framing. There are hold downs and hardware that wouldn't have been required most likely when your house was constructed. There's quite a bit of upgrade that has occurred in most cases and for these houses. So I would recommend really kind of diving into it. I did a deep dive in estimates that I was doing, and pretty much everything has VOC limitations, from lumber off-gassing, plywoods, the glues they use. You can take a portion of a lot of the material that you wouldn't think relates just VOCs alone. There are complete books that describe the limits of VOCs at this point that never existed. The paints they use in your cabinetry. So there's little bits of almost every line item that can go to code upgrades. And I would advise getting aggressive with that, working with your contractor to pull those monies out, because they're different. The low flow toilets, all of these things that were not code back in the day. Sprinklers are the obvious one, yes or no, but it's really the nuances of almost every material in the home has a code upgrade.
All right, thank you. And then speaking of that code upgrade, so Doug, this was the example from the city of Santa Rosa, where they outlined, here's the code upgrades that we see. This is not necessarily something every jurisdiction does. I know, Lisa, a couple of your jurisdictions did for the Marshall Fire, and it's really helpful to help contractors do that. But if they don't get that, how would they tease this out? Because it's not something, you know, a contractor necessarily thinks
No.
about. I have to break this up into this.
And even myself, 30 some years or high 20s going into this, this was new to me. And then I myself, just because I went that way, and talking to others and seeing other examples of what other contractors were doing, it kind of opened my eyes to, oh my gosh, you're right. This would be required. This in concrete, at least in Sonoma County, Santa Rosa, there's a fly ash mix that has to be included in the concrete mix, which is an addition and wasn't required before. So there are multitudes way beyond smoke alarm, because that's an obvious one again. So really, as you think through it, so where do you go for that resource? I don't know. I would just challenge the person. This is another, I guess, the vetting process of what, when you're interviewing these folks, what do they do? What's their ideas on this? See how creative they are. I'm not saying hire or fire somebody due to their lack of creativity, but if they've worked with this and understand this, that means they have an integration to this whole rebuild process. There's from building a lot of homes on finished lots for home builders, building rebuild homes is a completely different story. There's multiple things to learn, even after a long career, on the nuances of rebuilding.
So I
Yeah.
think what I've learned is some of this is dependent on your specific insurance company, your adjuster, and your policy as to how specific they are going to want to be in doing kind of a line by line comparison on what was required in 1992 versus what was required today. And so it's not something that I don't believe any of the jurisdictions themselves have created kind of line by line comparisons of all of the different codes that were in place with Marshall Fire. But I do know that there are some local design professionals, local architects who have done more of those line by line comparisons. And it might be that if your insurance company is pushing back on some of these code upgrades and you believe you have that coverage, your builder will probably have to help you with that. Local jurisdictions can help verify, but it's not something we've done. But I would say check with some of our local folks here or local United policyholders, or check the Slack that is around. I know this has been a topic of conversation, and there are local architects who have created these comparisons.
Right. And that feeds into a really important point, Lisa, is if your builder doesn't know, touch base with your neighbors to see what their builder might have done, because crowdsourcing this information to shorten that learning curve is really helpful. So this is an example of what you might get from a builder. Here's a code estimate that another one provided using Xactimate, I believe. And then this is an example where they were broken out, right? So here's, all of the pieces related to this one thing. So any of that information that you can share and gather and make it easier on yourself is just incredibly important to take advantage of those things. It's like Doug mentioned earlier, being creative with this. Part of that creativity is that crowdsourcing, right? And so, Annie, we want to touch on this last slide here about wrapping up your rebuild.
Yeah, you should, as Doug was talking earlier, you should have a walkthrough with your builder. Whether they give you a roll of blue tape, or you make a list, or you point out issues that you see, and then they should come back and fix all that, and then you walk it again. That doesn't mean that you won't have some small issues as you move into your house. Those will come to light, and then you'll call your builder and let them know, or whatever the process may be, and have them come and fix those things. Your final occupancy certificate is huge, and your lien releases. The lien releases, you could have a lien slapped on your house, your property, and you wouldn't even know it. So you need to keep an eye on those and make sure that for whatever, obviously we all have plumbing, we all have drywall, there should be a lien release for each and every step of that. Notice of completion is actually a Doug thing to talk about, and I'll let him go on that one.
I kind of talked about that one earlier. So the lien release, the terminologies, you want final releases. So if I'm a plumber you're going to get conditional lien releases along the way. So a typical plumber's paid 3 or 4 times, depending on how the subcontract is written up with the general contractor. So along the way, so a plumbing rough, for instance, is it frame inspection, top out. So they're going to bill a portion of their overall cost to the builder and then provide a conditional release, meaning it's conditional. It's conditional because it's still ongoing. The home and project aren't done, but if you pay me this amount as per contract, this will then become this conditional release will be satisfied. Then that turns into, okay, I'm all done with sinks and faucets and everything else. Their final release comes in. Final releases are what you really want to see. Conditional along the way. So if you're paying for a frame inspection, which involves all of the MEPs, the mechanicals, the electricals, plumbers, all of those, you should be seeing a stack of conditional lien releases, meaning they're halfway done or more with their job, and they should have a conditional release that you can see along the way. So you don't have to wait till the end for all of these. So that all leads to the final releases. House is done. They've been paid off. Final releases are compiled. After that is done, the contractor can file the notice of completion at the jurisdiction. It's a recorded document that goes into the county, the city, and it is, you stand in line and get a stamp. I've done it. And so what happened, that's what I was talking about when the clock starts ticking. That starts the clock of liens have to be filed within a certain amount of time. Otherwise, beyond that time, no more liens will be accepted. So if a lien comes in after the notice of completion has terminated, there's no longer a lien. So that's the importance of asking for this. I think it's not commonly done, but you should be requesting it. And going back up a little further, I think warranty is key. A warranty process as part of your interviewing. What's the warranty process? Does the person, leave their job to come over? Is there a warranty person? How does that work? How things will happen with the house. You'll use a drawer the 4th time and the drawer will not function anymore in some cases. Just saying, all sorts of components come into that home and some fail. So you need to know the process of how to get these repairs done. Are you held to calling the vendors yourself, or does the builder come back out and fix it? And what are the limits of that fix? That's where the 210 warranty we talked about before gives you guidelines. What we do is we do a 210 warranty. We also have a warranty department. My advice was always after the walkthrough, get a piece of paper, put it in your top drawer. Whenever you run across something, a fit and finish issue, write it on the paper and wait 30 days because it's not an Easter egg hunt. You don't want to just find something and call up, but let it pile up a little bit, call the warranty department and have them come pick it up or come fix it. It's an intrusion in your life, and it's just an entire process. The relationship should not end at final occupancy. It should really just start, because if it's a builder who's in business, they want to actually maybe build a home for you or your family or your friends sometime in the future. It's not just a one-time shot.
All right, thank you for that. All right, so we're gonna do a wrap here really quick. So just a reminder that if you've got a tip to share, please send it to info@, and we will add that to our Survivor Speak tip series. Encourage you to join us at our Survivor to Survivor forums. You can register online at events. Don't forget, if you're having a problem with insurance, please reach out to your Department of Insurance. This is the Colorado Division of Insurance, how to reach them. This is how you would reach the California Department of Insurance. And then our Ask an Expert forum. If you've got a specific insurance question, please feel free to reach out on our website, register, it's free, write in your question, and we will help get that answer. And then last but not least, thanks to our funders who enable us to do this work. And I want to do a special thank you to Doug and Lisa for staying at the end of a long day and giving us your time and volunteering. We so appreciate you being part of this webinar tonight. Thank you. And I'll double check. I don't see anything in the Q&A, so I think we are good to go. Thank you all for your time and have a relaxing rest of your evening.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.